The sun has become a bloated, bruised titan, a crimson sphere that has swallowed the inner planets and now looms over the horizon of a world it once nurtured. This is the era of the red giant, a phase of stellar evolution where the core has contracted into a dense knot of helium while the outer envelope has surged outward, driven by the ferocious energy of a hydrogen-burning shell. The light it casts is no longer the vibrant, life-giving gold of the Holocene, but a heavy, viscous copper that saturates the thinning atmosphere. The sky, once a brilliant azure, has deepened into a bruised violet, a testament to the oxygen and nitrogen bleeding away into the unfeeling vacuum of space. Below, the geography of the world has been rendered unrecognizable. The great basins that once held the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans are now vast, cracked salt flats, shimmering with a ghostly heat. The last of the water has retreated into high-altitude steam, or boils in shallow caustic pools where the temperature remains locked at hundreds of degrees. On the high plateaus of the remaining continents, the final monuments of human ambition stand in silent, gleaming rows. These are the Silver Needles, vessels of incredible complexity, forged from alloys that did not exist when the species first looked upward from the mud. They are the culmination of millions of years of curiosity and thousands of years of mathematical refinement. Their hulls are polished to a mirror finish to deflect the relentless solar wind, and their engines are designed to harness the very power of the atom. They appear poised for flight, their sharp profiles cutting through the hazy air, seemingly ready to pierce the veil of the atmosphere and seek sanctuary among the distant, cooler lights of the galactic disk. Yet, for all their elegance and the brilliance of the minds that conceived them, they remain tethered to the ground by the invisible, unbreakable chains of orbital mechanics and the crushing reality of the rocket equation. The central tragedy of this final hour is not a lack of will, but the cold, uncompromising nature of physics. To lift a single one of these ships beyond the gravitational well of a planet that has grown heavy with the heat of a dying star requires an expenditure of energy that defies the resources of a collapsing civilization. The math is a cruel master. For every kilogram of payload intended for the stars, thousands of kilograms of propellant must be burned just to break the bonds of the Earth. Even if the ships could reach the safety of the void, they would find themselves adrift in a solar system where the sun's reach has grown long and its radiation has become a lethal tide. The escape velocity of 11.2 kilometers per second is a wall that no amount of hope can climb. We are a species that has learned to weigh the stars and map the curvature of space-time, yet we find ourselves trapped in the cradle that has become a furnace. The primal urge to survive, to leap across the abyss to the flickering promise of Proxima Centauri, or the distant systems of the Orion Arm, beats like a drum in the heart of the last observers. It is a biological imperative that has driven life to climb out of the tide pools and conquer the mountain peaks. But that urge now collides with the mathematical certainty of our confinement. The distances between the stars are not merely large, they are conceptually alien to a brain evolved for the scale of a single planet. To reach the nearest neighbour, 4.2 light-years away, is to contemplate a journey of 40 trillion kilometres. In the face of such numbers, the Silver Needles are not ships but stationary tombs. They represent the limit of what can be done when a species is confined to a single well of gravity, with a finite supply of energy. As the sun continues its slow, rhythmic pulse, expanding and contracting like the heart of a dying god, the stars above begin to fade from view. They are being washed out by the copper glare of the red giant, receding into the background of a sky that is becoming a wall of fire. These stars were once seen as destinations, as the next frontier for a restless and expanding empire. Now they are revealed to be something far more distant and indifferent. They are unreachable lanterns, hanging in a rising tide of darkness, separated from us by a void that does not care for our survival. The light that leaves those distant suns today will reach this spot long after the Earth has been reduced to a cinder, long after the last silver needle has melted into the cooling crust of a dead world. The atmosphere continues to hiss away, a thin veil of gas escaping into the black. The pressure drops, and the silence of the vacuum begins to assert its dominance over the roar of the wind. The conflict is reaching its inevitable conclusion. The dream of interstellar migration, of a humanity scattered like seeds among the constellations, is being extinguished by the very laws of nature that allowed us to understand the universe in the first place. We have reached the edge of the infinite, and we have found that the door is locked from the outside. The stars were never meant to be touched. They were designed to be admired from afar, a cosmic gallery that we were never invited to enter. In this final sunset, the copper light reflects off the hulls of the ships that will never fly, casting long, tapering shadows over a world that is finally and forever returning to the dust from which it was born. This long descent into the cooling embers of a planetary life began with a look upward, a gaze that was once comforted by the illusion of proximity. For the vast majority of the human story, the heavens were not a void, but a ceiling. To the ancients, the stars were silver nails driven into a firmament of polished basalt or pinpricks, in a heavy velvet curtain that shielded the world from the blinding radiance of the divine. This was a cosy, intimate cosmos, a series of nested crystalline spheres that hummed with a celestial music, where the highest mountain peak seemed almost tall enough to brush against the passing moon. In this small, contained theatre, the stars were neighbours, their light a constant and reachable presence that guided the mariner and the farmer alike. The universe had a roof, and though it was vast, it was not yet infinite. The first cracks in this velvet dome appeared not through the lens of a telescope, but through the rigorous application of geometry and the haunting realization of a Dutch polymath in the late 17th century. Christian Huygens, a man whose mind was as precise as the clockworks he engineered, sought to bridge the gap between the familiar light of our sun and the cold, distant glimmer of Sirius, the brightest star in the winter sky. He did not possess the sophisticated senses of the modern era, yet he understood a fundamental truth of optics, that light diminishes with the square of its distance. To find out how far away the stars truly were, he decided to bring the sun down to the level of a star. Inside a darkened room, Huygens constructed a simple yet revolutionary apparatus. He took a screen and drilled within it a microscopic hole, a tiny aperture designed to let through only a fraction of the sun's overwhelming brilliance. By varying the size of this hole and comparing the resulting point of light to the memory of Sirius as it appeared in the night sky, he attempted to find the exact ratio of their brightness. It was a painstaking process of reduction, a systematic dimming of the world's primary source of life until it matched the ghostly flicker of the far-off suns. When the calculations were finally complete, the result was a mathematical blade that severed humanity from its sense of belonging in the cosmos. Huygens realized that for the sun to appear as faint as Sirius, it would have to be moved to a distance 27,664 times further away than its current position. In that moment, the crystalline spheres shattered. The velvet dome was stripped away, revealing not a ceiling, but an abyss. The sun, which had always been the undisputed centre of the human experience, was revealed to be a solitary campfire in a desert of impossible dimensions. If Sirius was indeed a sun like our own, the space between us was not a mere journey, but a gulf of nothingness so profound that it defied the geometric intuition of a biological mind. This was the birth of the true void. The realization rippled through the consciousness of the era, transforming the night sky from a protective canopy into a terrifying window onto the infinite. The stars were no longer jewels. They were gargantuan furnaces of hydrogen and helium, separated from one another by trillions of kilometers of absolute silence. The cozy mountain peak universe, where one could imagine climbing a ladder to touch the face of a god, was replaced by a cold, dark ocean where the islands of light were so far apart that their rays took years, decades, or centuries to reach the eye of the observer. This transition marked the end of human innocence regarding our place in the physical world. We move from being the central actors in a small, well-lit room to being microscopic inhabitants of a single grain of dust, adrift in a cathedral of shadows. The scale of the universe began to stretch toward the unreachable, and with every new measurement the gap grew wider. We learned that the light we see when we look at the stars is an echo of the past, a ghost of a radiance that may have been extinguished long before its message reached our shores. The sky was no longer a solid thing, but a graveyard of time, where the distances were so great that the very concept of now became a local and fragile illusion. As this understanding deepened, The psychological weight of the void began to press down upon the human spirit. The realization that the stars were suns meant that they might have worlds of their own, yet the distance ensured that those worlds would remain forever beyond our grasp. The emptiness was not merely a physical fact, it was a barrier to the soul. We had discovered that we lived on the edge of a shore that looked out over an ocean with no visible horizon. The silver needles we would one day build were born from this ancient shock, a desperate attempt to bridge a gap that Christian Huygens had first revealed to be wide enough to swallow all of human history without a sound. The transition from the painted ceiling to the infinite deep was the first step toward the realization that we are a species defined by its isolation, standing on the brink of a darkness that is as beautiful as it is absolute. To name this abyss, we have invented the light year, a term that serves as a linguistic shroud concealing the true, agonizing proportions of the cosmos. It is a seductive lie. It borrows the familiar comfortable cadence of a solar cycle, 365 days of seasons, growth and decay, and applies it to a distance that defies every biological instinct we possess. By combining the concept of time with the fastest speed in the universe, we have created a mental shorthand that makes the stars seem reachable, as if they were merely a few years away on a cosmic calendar. But the physical reality of a single light year is a nightmare of scale. It is a distance of nearly 6 trillion miles, a number so vast that if a traveller were to count every mile as a single second, the task would consume nearly 200,000 years. This is not a measurement. It is a wall of pure, unadulterated space. A ship venturing into this void does not experience the thrill of speed or the rush of movement. Instead, it enters a state of suspended animation within a sensory vacuum. For centuries, the view from the viewport remains static. The constellations, which we perceive as fixed from the surface of the Earth, do not shift or warp as the vessel hurtles forward. There are no landmarks, no clouds of gas to provide a sense of motion, and no celestial bodies to mark the passage of leagues. The ship is a solitary spark in a cathedral of absolute black, where the only indication of progress is the slow, rhythmic pulse of the onboard computers. To the human passenger, the sensation is not one of flight, but of being entombed in a silent, unchanging eternity. The distance between stars is not filled with wonders. It is an ocean of nothingness that dwarfs the entire history of human movement. Every journey ever taken by every member of the human species, from the first footsteps out of the African Rift Valley to the high-altitude orbits of the modern era, amounts to less than a flickering moment in the crossing of a single light year. We are accustomed to a world defined by boundaries, where every sea has a far shore and every mountain has a summit. The interstellar void possesses no such hospitality. It is a physical barrier composed of nothing but the absence of matter. It is a desert where the wells are separated by trillions of miles of parched radioactive vacuum. This is the shore of the infinite, a place where our most magnificent technological achievements are revealed to be stationary. Even our fastest probes, travelling at tens of thousands of miles per hour, are effectively frozen in the face of galactic proportions. When we speak of the distance to the nearest star as being 4.2 light-years, we are using a deceptive brevity. We are masking the fact that a human being, travelling at the speeds currently dictated by the laws of chemical propulsion, would need to endure more than 2,000 generations of birth, life, and death within the confines of a metal hull just to reach the outskirts of that neighbouring system. The year in light year is a ghost, a remnant of our terrestrial origins that has no meaning in the deep dark. In the void, time and distance merge into a single, crushing weight. The light of a star does not travel to us in the way a bird flies across a field. It survives a brutal gauntlet of empty space, arriving as a weary remnant of a distant fire. To stand on this shore is to realize that the universe was not built to our scale. Our units of measurement, the mile, the kilometre, the astronomical unit, are the tools of a species that lives in a small, crowded room. When we apply them to the gap between suns, they shatter. 1 trillion miles is not just a larger version of 100 miles. It is a different state of existence. It is a distance that consumes light itself, stretching the photons until they are red and exhausted. It is a distance that isolates every star into a permanent lonely prison, The light year is our attempt to whistle in the dark, a linguistic trick to keep from admitting that the stars are not just far away, they're effectively in another universe entirely, separated from us by a physical reality that our minds were never designed to comprehend. The silver needles sitting on the scorched plateaus of the Earth are built to navigate this deception, but they cannot escape the truth of the void. They are designed for a medium that is fundamentally hostile to the persistence of complex matter. In the space between stars, there is no wind to fill a sail, no current to carry a hull, and no ground to provide a footing. There is only the relentless, agonizing stretch of the infinite, an expanse so wide that even the scream of a dying sun would be swallowed without a ripple. We look out at the lanterns of the galaxy and see a map of destinations, but the map is a lie. The distances are the territory, and the territory is a wasteland of such staggering magnitude that it renders the very idea of a journey an absurdity. We are not travellers in weight. We are prisoners of a scale that has no mercy and no end. Beyond the reach of the solar wind, where the influence of our sun finally yields to the cold pressure of the interstellar medium, two small skeletal machines drift through the eternal night. These are the Voyager probes, the most distant emissaries of a civilization that once believed it could bridge the gap between worlds. Launched in the late 1970s during a rare alignment of the outer planets, they were propelled by the gravity of giants, flung into the dark with a velocity that would cross the North American continent in less than 5 minutes. To a human observer on the ground, they are the embodiment of speed, the fastest objects ever conceived by our species. Yet, as they move into the profound emptiness between stars, this speed is revealed to be a pathetic, frozen crawl. Across the face of the galaxy, they are not soaring. They are merely drifting, like autumn leaves caught in a stagnant pond. The pride that accompanied their departure was immense. They carried within them the golden record, a copper disc plated in gold, etched with the sounds of wind and thunder, the songs of birds, and the greetings of 55 human languages. It was a message in a bottle cast into the cosmic ocean, a testament to the fact that on a small blue planet, life had attained the complexity to wonder about its neighbours. At the time of their launch, there was a sense that these machines were the vanguard of a coming age of discovery, the first tentative steps of a child learning to walk. But the reality of the interstellar medium has stripped away that optimism, leaving only the cold, hard facts of distance and time. The Voyager probes have become silent monuments to a kinetic limit that we cannot yet surpass. Their plutonium hearts are cooling, their transmitters are falling silent, and they are becoming nothing more than inert pieces of metal and glass, wandering through a dark that will never know their name. To reach even the nearest neighbouring star system, these probes would need to maintain their current pace for tens of thousands of years. Voyager 1, the more distant of the two, is currently heading toward a star in the constellation of Camelopardalis, known as Gliese 445. It will not arrive at the outskirts of that system for another 40,000 years. By the time it makes its closest approach, the civilization that built it will have likely vanished, its cities crumbled into dust and its languages forgotten. The timescales of the galaxy are so vastly superior to the lifespan of a technological species that the voyage itself becomes a form of stasis. The probes are not travelling in any meaningful sense. They are being swallowed by the sheer volume of the space they inhabit. They have moved beyond the protective bubble of the sun, entering the true deep, where the density of matter is so low that a single atom of hydrogen per cubic centimetre is considered a crowd. This is the physical reality of our current kinetic reach. We have learned to throw stones with incredible precision, but we are still only throwing stones into a sea that has no bottom. The velocity of 17 kilometers per second, which seems so impressive in the context of a planetary orbit, is a rounding error when measured against the light year. If the distance to the nearest star were represented by the length of a football field, the Voyager probes have moved less than an inch from the starting line in the decades since their launch. They are frozen in the face of the infinite, their golden records carrying the voices of a world that is already becoming a memory. The pride of the 1970s has been replaced by the humbling realization that we have not yet learned how to sail. We have only learned how to drift. The galaxy is not a connected landscape, but a collection of isolated islands, each separated by a sea so wide and so deep that no message can truly matter. The currents of light and gravity that flow between these islands move at a pace that mocks our frantic ambitions. We once thought of the stars as a network, a map of potential colonies and outposts. Now we see them as they are, fortresses of fire protected by the ultimate moat of the vacuum. The Voyager probes are the proof of our isolation. They are the furthest we have ever reached, and yet they have not even left the front porch of our solar home. They serve as a humbling reminder that while our minds can conceive of the infinite, our machines are still bound by the slow, heavy laws of the physical world. In this vast, dark ocean, the silence is absolute. There are no echoes in the interstellar medium, no reflections to tell the traveller that they are making progress. The probes move through a medium where the nearest solid object is trillions of miles away. They are the ultimate testament to the loneliness of the carbon-based mind, a mind that seeks connection in a universe designed for separation. As they drift further into the dark, they represent the closing of a chapter in human history. The moment we realize that the stars are not our neighbors, but distant indifferent giants who will never hear our call. The sea is too wide, the currents are too slow, and we are left watching as our most ambitious messengers vanish into a void that has no interest in our stories. The transition from the dream of the stars to the realization of the void is complete, leaving us to contemplate the walls of our cosmic prison. The foundation of our confinement is not a lack of technological ingenuity, but a fundamental architecture of the universe discovered in the early years of the 20th century. Albert Einstein, working within the quiet confines of a patent office in 1905, unraveled a truth that effectively walled off the stars from the reach of physical matter. He realized that light is not merely a fast-moving phenomenon, but the absolute speed of causality itself. At precisely 299,792,458 meters per second, light represents the maximum rate at which any information or influence can propagate through the fabric of space-time. This is not a speed limit in the way a highway possesses a regulated maximum. It is a structural property of reality, an asymptote that matter can approach, but never touch. The reason for this restriction lies in the intimate and transformative relationship between energy and mass. As a vessel, one of those silver needles resting on the parched earth, is pushed faster and faster, the energy required to increase its velocity does not simply translate into more speed. According to the dictates of special relativity, as an object approaches a significant fraction of the speed of light, the energy poured into its engines begins to manifest as an increase in the object's relativistic mass. The ship becomes effectively heavier, more resistant to further acceleration. To push a craft to 90% of the speed of light requires an enormous expenditure of power, but to push it to 99% requires exponentially more. To reach the speed of light itself, a ship with even the mass of a single grain of sand would require an infinite amount of energy, a physical impossibility in a universe of finite resources. The scale of this energy requirement is staggering, moving far beyond the capacities of any planetary civilization. To accelerate a modest spacecraft weighing perhaps 10 tons to just 10% of the speed of light would require a quantity of energy equal to the total annual energy consumption of the entire human race in the 21st century. This is not the energy found in a battery or a tank of chemical fuel. This is the raw power of the sun itself, harnessed and focused into a single point. To move a fleet of such ships would require the dismantling of entire planets to fuel the fusion reactors, or the construction of Dyson swarms to capture the total output of a star. The physics of motion has turned the stars into high-priced luxuries that no economy, no matter how advanced, can truly afford. We are not merely limited by our engines, we are limited by the very cost of movement through the vacuum. Beyond the barriers of energy and mass lies the even more formidable wall of causality. Space and time are not separate entities but are woven together into a four-dimensional manifold. The speed of light is the thread that holds this weave together. If a ship were somehow able to bypass the energy requirements and travel faster than light, it would not merely be moving quickly, it would be moving backward through the sequence of events. It would arrive at its destination before it had departed, shattering the logical consistency of the universe. To prevent such paradoxes, the fabric of space-time exerts a relentless pressure on matter, ensuring that the cause always precedes the effect. The speed of light is the guardian of history, a cosmic law that ensures the universe remains a coherent narrative rather than a chaotic jumble of disconnected moments. This realization transforms the night sky from a field of potential into a series of isolated cells. Every star we see is a light source that is functionally quarantined. Even if we were to develop the most efficient engines imaginable, harnessing antimatter or the curvature of space itself, we would still be operating within the shadow of this universal limit. The time it takes for a signal to travel from one sun to another is a gap that cannot be shortened. A conversation between civilizations separated by only 10 light years would take 20 years for a single exchange of greetings. This is the loneliness of the relativistic prison. The laws of physics do not merely make travel difficult, they make the very idea of a galactic community a temporal impossibility. The speed of light is therefore not a goal for us to achieve, nor a record for us to break. It is a prison sentence written into the very geometry of the vacuum. It ensures that every intelligent species, no matter how brilliant or ambitious, remains a local phenomenon. We are tethered to our home stars not by lack of imagination, but by the fundamental constants of nature. The silver needles may point toward the heavens, but they are fighting against a reality that becomes more rigid the harder they try to flee. We are inhabitants of a universe where the distances are vast and the maximum speed is agonizingly slow, leaving us to watch as the light of distant worlds reaches us from a past we can never visit and a future we can never join. The cosmic wall is silent, invisible and absolute, and it has stood since the first moment of the Great Expansion, ensuring that the islands of life remain forever separated by the dark. The void between the stars is often described as a vacuum, a pristine and empty expanse that offers no resistance to the passage of a vessel. This is a lethal misunderstanding. To a ship remains stationary, the interstellar medium is indeed a ghost, a thin whisper of hydrogen atoms and microscopic silicates, so sparse that a cubic centimetre of space contains less matter than the most perfect vacuum ever achieved in a laboratory on Earth. But to a ship attempting to cross the abyss at relativistic speeds, this emptiness transforms into a high-energy furnace, a minefield of invisible bullets, where the very fabric of the medium becomes a weapon of total annihilation. The faster a ship travels to overcome the agony of distance, the more the universe conspires to tear it asunder. Consider a single grain of dust, a microscopic speck of carbon, or frozen water no larger than a fragment of smoke. In the stillness of the solar system, such a particle is harmless, a mere mote of light in a sunbeam. However, when a vessel reaches even 10% of the speed of light, the physics of kinetic energy undergo a terrifying transformation. At these velocities, the energy of an impact is not merely additive, it is governed by the square of the velocity. That same speck of dust, upon striking the hull of a fast-moving ship, does not merely dent the metal. It undergoes an instantaneous phase transition, vaporizing into a plume of white-hot plasma and releasing energy equivalent to the detonation of several kilograms of high explosives. If the ship were to reach half the speed of light, a collision with a pebble the size of a marble would carry the destructive force of a tactical nuclear warhead, blooming into a sphere of gamma rays and thermal heat that would liquefy the strongest alloys ever forged. The engineering required to survive this gauntlet is a nightmare of escalating proportions. To protect the fragile occupants and the delicate electronics of a starship, designers must conceive of shielding that defies the traditional limits of weight and mass. One solution is the use of a sacrificial prow, a massive block of solid ice or tungsten, several meters thick, positioned at the front of the craft to absorb the relentless bombardment of the interstellar medium. But this solution introduces a cruel paradox. The more mass added for protection, the more energy is required to accelerate the ship, as established by the uncompromising laws of relativity. Every kilogram of armor necessitates tons of additional fuel, which in turn requires a larger ship, creating a cycle of diminishing returns that threatens to ground the mission before it ever leaves the launch pad. Even if the ship could withstand the impact of dust and pebbles, it remains vulnerable to the most fundamental inhabitant of the void. the individual hydrogen atom. At relativistic speeds, the thin gas of the interstellar medium is no longer a fluid to be moved through. It becomes a hailstorm of ionizing radiation. Each atom, encountered at a fraction of the speed of light, strikes the hull with the energy of 100 million electron volts. These are not merely collisions, they are subatomic penetrations. The hydrogen nuclei sail through the outer layers of the ship like microscopic needles, slicing through the molecular bonds of the hull and the genetic code of the crew. Over the course of a journey lasting decades, this constant erosion would turn the ship's structure into a brittle, honeycombed ruin and unravel the biological blueprints of any living thing on board. The void is thus revealed as a target-rich environment for any object possessing the audacity to move quickly. The vacuum is not a passive theatre, but an active participant in the destruction of the traveller. To move through the space between stars is to endure a constant high-velocity sandblasting that scours the very essence of the vessel. We see the silver needles on the Earth's surface and admire their aerodynamic grace, but in the deep dark, aerodynamics are irrelevant. The only shape that matters is the shield, and the only reality is the impact. The stars are protected by a barrier of pure kinetic potential, a shield of dust and gas that treats every intruder as a target for a nuclear-level event. This high-energy furnace ensures that the passage between worlds is a gauntlet of fire. The dream of a sleek, effortless glide through the constellations is replaced by the image of a battered, scorched hulk, hiding behind a wall of melting ice, desperately trying to outrun the radiation that bleeds through its every seam. The interstellar medium is the ultimate gatekeeper, a physical manifestation of the universe's refusal to be tamed. It demands a price in energy and mass that no biological species can easily pay, reinforcing the wall that separates the islands of light. We are left to watch the stars from the safety of our atmosphere, knowing that to reach out and touch them is to invite 1,000 microscopic suns to ignite against our hull, turning our greatest ambition into a scattered cloud of radioactive debris. If the physical barriers of energy and the kinetic minefield of the vacuum were not enough to deter the traveller, the very geometry of time provides a final, psychological guillotine. This is the temporal tragedy of relativity, a consequence of the fact that time is not a universal constant, but a flexible, stretching fabric that yields to the influence of speed. A ticking clock on the wall of a starship moving at a significant fraction of the velocity of light is no longer in sync with the ticking clocks of the world it left behind. As the vessel accelerates, the seconds begin to stretch like warm glass, elongating into minutes, hours, and years in the reference frame of the stationary observer. To the pilot within the hull, the rhythmic pulse of their own heart and the mechanical sweep of the second hand remain unchanged, yet they are unwittingly sliding into a different stream of history. This divergence creates a rift in the human experience that no bridge can span. A pilot who ventures to a neighbouring star system, perhaps a mere 5 years of travel in their own subjective reality, is effectively severing their connection to the timeline of the species. While they eat their meals, sleep in their bunk, and watch the distant suns grow larger in the viewport, the Earth they know is undergoing a frantic, accelerated decay. For every month that passes on the ship, decades or even centuries may scream past on the home planet. The traveller is not merely moving through space, they are falling through a hole in time, a chronological abyss that separates the living from the dead. The return from such a journey is a homecoming to a graveyard. The pilot descends through an atmosphere that may have changed its very composition, toward a surface that no longer bears the scars of their era. The cities they once called home have been reclaimed by the forest, or buried under the shifting sands of 1,000 years. The languages they spoke have drifted into unrecognizable dialects, and the nations they served have long since dissolved into the footnotes of a forgotten history. Every friend, every lover, and every child they once knew has been reduced to dust and silence, their lives having played out in the brief interval of the pilot's absence. The traveller steps out of the Silver Needle not as a hero, but as a ghost, a living anachronism who belongs to a world that has ceased to exist. This is the social horror of interstellar flight. It is a form of permanent exile that cannot be mended by any technology. Even if the ship were capable of making the return trip, there is no way to move backward through the temporal rift. The pilot is a prisoner of the future, a man or woman who has traded their entire social and emotional universe for a few years of observation among the stars. The psychological weight of this isolation is a burden that the human mind was never evolved to carry. We are creatures of narrative and continuity, defined by our relationships and our place within a communal history. To be stripped of that context is to suffer a kind of ontological death. The rift in time ensures that interstellar travel can never be a matter of commerce or colonization in the way we understand those terms. There can be no galactic empire where a central authority governs distant worlds, for the time it takes to send a message and receive a reply would span the rise and fall of entire dynasties. A colony sent to a distant star would become a separate species, evolving and changing in total isolation, while the mother world aged into obsolescence. The stars are not just separated by miles, they are separated by eras. To cross the void is to commit a slow-motion suicide of the self, leaving behind everything that makes a life meaningful in exchange for the cold, indifferent data of a foreign sun. As the pilot stands amidst the rubble of a civilization that has forgotten his name, the true nature of the speed of light is revealed. It is the ultimate arbiter of human relevance. It ensures that our stories remain local, tied to the specific ticking of the clocks on our home world. The stars are beautiful because they are distant, but their distance is measured in more than just space. It is measured in the loss of everything we hold dear. The silver needles may be able to pierce the vacuum, but they cannot pierce the veil of time. We are left on the shore of the infinite, realizing that the price of the stars is the total surrender of our past, our present, and our very identity. Interstellar travel is not a journey. It is a one-way ticket into a future that has no room for us, a silent exile into a universe that continues to tick away, indifferent to the ghosts who try to catch its pace. The human body is not a universal machine. It is a hyper-specialized biological artifact, a product of nearly 4 billion years of refinement within a very specific environmental envelope. We are the children of a particular pressure, a particular temperature, and a particular magnetic shield. Our physiology is a map of the surface of the Earth, a complex network of chemical reactions that rely on the constant, downward pull of 9.8 meters per second squared. When we remove this organism from its cradle and thrust it into the deep dark, we're not merely challenging its endurance, we're asking it to function in a reality for which it has no blueprint. The silver needles of our ambition are filled with a substance, human tissue, that is fundamentally incompatible with the environment they intend to traverse. Outside the protective embrace of the Van Allen belts and the thick cushion of the atmosphere, the universe is a theatre of invisible high-energy violence, galactic cosmic rays, which are atomic nuclei stripped of their electrons and accelerated to nearly the speed of light by distant supernova, stream through the void in a relentless, silent bombardment. These are not like the soft photons of visible light. They are subatomic projectiles of immense power. As they pass through the hull of a ship and into the soft tissues of a living being, they act as microscopic scythes, slicing through the intricate double helix of the genetic code. They do not merely damage cells, they shatter the very instructions for life. The repair mechanisms of the body, evolved to handle the minor insults of terrestrial radiation, are overwhelmed by this celestial artillery. The result is a slow, systemic unravelling of the self, a cascade of mutations and the catastrophic failure of the blood-forming organs. We are biological sculptures being slowly sandblasted at the molecular level by the very stars we wish to visit. The absence of a constant gravitational anchor initiates a different, but equally devastating process of dissolution. The human skeleton is a dynamic structure, constantly remodelling itself in response to the stress of weight. In the weightless environment of a starship, the body perceives the lack of resistance as a signal of obsolescence. Within days, the bones begin to shed their mineral content, leaching calcium and phosphorus into the bloodstream. The dense, resilient lattice of the femur and the spine begins to turn into something brittle and translucent, akin to thin glass. Simultaneously, the muscular system, no longer required to fight the unrelenting pull of a planet, enters a state of rapid atrophy. The heart, a muscular pump designed to push blood against the heavy gradient of the Earth, begins to shrink and weaken. the structural integrity of the human form dissolves. We become soft, fragile creatures, our muscles turning to water and our frames losing the strength to ever stand again on a world with a significant pull. Beyond the mechanical and the radiological, we are tethered to the specific chemistry of our origin. Our lungs are calibrated for a specific partial pressure of oxygen and nitrogen, a balance that is difficult to maintain in a closed-loop system over decades. Our circadian rhythms are tied to the 24-hour rotation of a single world, and our internal microbiome, the trillions of bacteria that allow us to digest food and maintain our immune systems, is an ecology born of terrestrial soil and water. In the sterile, recycled environment of a spacecraft, this internal ecosystem begins to drift and fail. We are not a spacefaring species, we are an earth-faring species. We are a biological extension of the planetary crust, the atmosphere and the magnetic field. To send a human being across the interstellar void is to send a deep-sea fish into the heart of a desert. The silver needles may be masterpieces of engineering, but the cargo they carry is fundamentally ill-suited for the destination. We have spent our entire history learning how to survive on a single blue marble, and our biology has become a rigid set of requirements that the universe at large has no interest in satisfying. The realization that our bodies are a terrestrial prison is the final, most intimate barrier to our expansion. We can build machines that survive the vacuum, but we cannot rebuild ourselves to thrive in a place where there is no wind, no weight, and no shield. We are anchored to our home not just by gravity, but by every strand of our genetic code, every drop of our blood, and every breath we take. The stars remain cold and distant, not because we lack the courage to reach them, but because we lack the biological permission to exist among them. This fragility ensures that while our machines may one day drift among the constellations, the carbon-based soul is destined to remain within the atmosphere that gave it life, watching the lights from the safety of the shore. If the individual cannot survive the crossing, the logic of the starfarer turns to the creation of a closed world, the generation ship. This is the ultimate expression of human defiance, a massive self-sustaining vessel designed to carry a small breeding population across the centuries-long gaps between the suns. It is envisioned as a cathedral of metal, a floating fragment of the Earth where the children of the original crew will give birth to the grandchildren who might finally set foot on a distant shore. But the transition from a planet-wide biosphere to a pressurized tin can is a descent into a systemic and psychological abyss. The dream of the starship is quickly replaced by the reality of a drifting tomb, where the very essence of what it means to be human begins to erode under the weight of claustrophobia and the failure of artificial cycles. The psychological collapse begins with the loss of the horizon. The human mind is evolved for a world of vast distances, where the eye can rest on a mountain range 50 miles away, or track the movement of clouds across an infinite sky. Within the corridors of a generation ship, the furthest point of sight is a bulkhead or a curving ceiling. There is no weather, only the rhythmic hiss of the ventilation system. There is no scent of rain on dry earth, no smell of pine needles or salt spray, only the flat, sterile odour of ozone and recycled plastic. For a generation born within these walls, the Earth is not a place, but a myth, a collection of digital files and ancestral stories that have no physical weight. This sensory deprivation breeds a unique form of madness, a spiritual starvation that turns the mind inward. Without the external stimulation of a living world, the social fabric of the ship begins to fray, as the inhabitants realize they are not explorers, but prisoners of a mission they never chose. This psychological decay is mirrored by the inevitable failure of the ship's closed-loop ecosystem. On Earth, the cycles of life are supported by trillions of tons of biomass, vast oceans, and a massive atmosphere that can absorb and neutralize the toxins of life. Within the confines of a spacecraft, this complexity must be reduced to a series of mechanical and biological filters. The balance of carbon dioxide and oxygen, or CO2 and O2, is not a static set of numbers but a frantic living dance. A slight malfunction in the scrubbers, or a minor chemical imbalance in the hydroponic tanks can lead to a runaway greenhouse effect or the slow suffocation of the crew within a matter of days. The margins for error are non-existent. In a world where every breath is recycled and every drop of water has passed through 1,000 bodies before, The margin between life and total systemic collapse is as thin as a single hull plate. The most terrifying threat to the generation ship, however, is the unseen world of the microbial. In the stagnant, warm environments of a closed system, the laws of evolution do not stop. A single, harmless bacterium hitching a ride in the gut of a passenger or the roots of a plant can undergo 1,000 generations of mutation while the human crew has barely aged a decade. Without the vast competitive landscape of a planetary ecosystem to keep it in check, a mutation can occur that turns a benign organism into a lethal pathogen or a consumer of the ship's vital plastics and seals. This is the biological equivalent of a short circuit. A microscopic shift in the genetic code of a fungus could lead to the total failure of the food supply, turning the vessel into a starving, lightless vault. The ship is a fragile island of order in a universe of entropy, and the more it tries to isolate itself, the more vulnerable it becomes to the internal pressures of its own biology. As the centuries pass, the purpose of the mission itself begins to dissolve. The original crew may have been driven by a noble vision of the future, but their descendants are born into a world of maintenance and survival. The ship becomes a god, a demanding and capricious entity that must be fed with labour and obedience just to keep the lights flickering. The knowledge required to operate the vessel's complex systems may be lost to time as education gives way to the immediate needs of repair. The starship, once a vehicle of discovery, becomes a drifting relic, a society that has forgotten where it is going and why it ever left. The inhabitants live out their lives in a twilight of technological decay, surrounded by machines they no longer understand, heading toward a star that has become nothing more than a distant, meaningless point of light. The generation ship is thus revealed to be a flawed metaphor for survival. We cannot carry the Earth with us in a box. We are not just passengers on a planet. We are participants in its vast interconnected systems. To strip away the complexity of the world and replace it with the cold efficiency of a machine is to strip away the very things that allow the human spirit to flourish. The silence of the void is matched by the silence of the ship's corridors, where the last survivors of a failed ambition wait for the inevitable moment when the power finally fails. The reality of the starship is not a glorious leap into the future, but a slow, claustrophobic slide into the dark, proving once again that we are a species tied to the specific, messy, and infinite beauty of the world that birthed us. The door to the stars is not just locked by the laws of physics, but by the requirements of our own sanity and the fragility of the life we carry within us. The heavens are not merely dark, they are possessed of a profound and unsettling silence. This is the great contradiction of the modern age, a riddle that has come to be known as the Fermi paradox. In a galaxy that is more than 13 billion years old, containing hundreds of billions of suns and an even greater number of planets, the absence of any signal or sign of other civilizations is a screaming void. If life is a natural consequence of the laws of chemistry, and if intelligence is a survival advantage, the stars should be crowded with the radio chatter of a million empires. Yet, when we turn our most sensitive ears toward the constellations, we hear only the hiss of background radiation and the rhythmic pulse of dead pulsars. The universe appears to be a vast empty theatre where the actors have either failed to arrive or have already left the stage. In the year 2017, a strange elongated splinter of stone and ice tumbled through the inner solar system, moving at a velocity that proved it had come from the space between the stars. This visitor, named Oumuamua, was the first interstellar object ever observed by human eyes. It did not broadcast a greeting. It did not slow its pace to investigate the life teeming on the third planet. It did not leave behind a message. It was a silent, tumbling ghost, a piece of cosmic debris that passed through our lives like a ship in the night that refuses to acknowledge a signal flare. Its passage was a humbling reminder of the scale of the dark. Even if the galaxy is littered with the remnants of other civilizations, they are separated by such immense gulfs of time and space that they might as well not exist at all. Oumuamua was not a messenger. It was a testament to the fact that in the interstellar medium, everything eventually becomes a cold, mute relic. This leads to the chilling proposition of the Great Filter, a theoretical barrier that prevents life from becoming a truly multiplanetary, or interstellar force. While many have speculated that this filter is a result of self-destruction through nuclear war or ecological collapse, there is a more subtle and terrifying possibility. The filter is simply the physics of the void. It is possible that every intelligent species eventually reaches the same threshold we currently face. They look out at the stars, they calculate the energy required to bridge the gap, they measure the fragility of their own biological forms, and they realize that the stars are a forbidden territory. Interstellar travel may not be a technological hurdle to be cleared, but a fundamental impossibility for any species bound by the laws of thermodynamics. The silence we hear is not the sound of extinction, but the sound of a billion civilizations deciding that the cost of the stars is too high to pay. The thermodynamics of the stars are a harsh accountant. To move even a small group of explorers to a nearby star system requires the total energy output of an entire planet for a year. From the perspective of a rational civilization, the return on such an investment is non-existent. Why would a society expend its most precious resources, depleting its own sun and its own world, merely to send a handful of individuals to a dead rock 4 light-years away? Individuals who, due to the effects of time dilation, would be forever lost to the history of their home. Interstellar travel is an economic absurdity. It is an act of planetary suicide for the sake of a curiosity that can never be satisfied. A civilization that survives long enough to develop the technology for such a journey is, by definition, a civilization that has learned to manage its resources with extreme care. Such a society would likely conclude that it is far more efficient to build a paradise at home than to chase the flickering ghosts of distant suns. The silence of the heavens is therefore a warning, a cosmic boundary marked by the ultimate law of distance. We are not being ignored. We are being kept apart by a universe that was never designed for connection. The speed of light is the cosmic speed limit for a reason. It ensures that the experiments of life remain isolated, prevented from interfering with one another or exhausting the resources of the galaxy too quickly. Every star is a sanctuary and a prison, a well of gravity and light that provides everything a species needs to flourish, provided they never try to leave. The great filter is the realization that the shore of the infinite is a place where no ship can sail. When we look at the silver needles on the earth, we see the remnants of a youthful arrogance, a time when we believed that our ambition was a match for the laws of nature. But the silence of the stars tells a different story. It tells us that we are part of a vast silent graveyard of ambitions, where every intelligent mind eventually comes to the same conclusion. We are the watchers of the infinite, not its masters. The reason we see no one else is because the distance is the final, unbreakable barrier that even the most advanced civilizations cannot cross. We are all of us alone, trapped on our respective islands, watching the same distant lights and wondering why no one answers the call, unaware that the answer is written in the very vacuum that separates us. The silence is the sound of a universe functioning exactly as it was intended, as a collection of beautiful, unreachable and perfectly isolated worlds. The isolation of these worlds is not merely a consequence of the vastness of space, but of a dynamic and accelerating betrayal by the universe itself. In the early decades of the 20th century, the astronomer Edwin Hubble, peering through the Great Telescope at Mount Wilson, observed a phenomenon that shattered the idea of a static cosmos. He found that the light from distant galaxies was systematically shifted toward the red end of the spectrum, a clear indication that they were receding from us. More importantly, he discovered that the further away a galaxy was, the faster it appeared to be moving. This was the first evidence that the fabric of space-time is not a fixed stage upon which the drama of matter unfolds, but a stretching, growing medium. The very emptiness between the stars is expanding, pushing the islands of the universe further and further apart with every passing second. In the late 1990s, this discovery took an even more ominous turn. Observations of distant supernovae revealed that the expansion of the universe is not slowing down under the influence of gravity, as was once expected, but is actually accelerating. This acceleration is driven by a mysterious property of the vacuum known as dark energy, a force that acts as a kind of cosmic repulsion. Dark energy is not a substance that can be depleted. It is a fundamental characteristic of space itself. As more space is created between galaxies, the total amount of dark energy increases, further driving the acceleration in a relentless feedback loop of cosmic dispersal. The door to the universe is not just standing still, it is actively being slammed shut. Every day that we remain tethered to the Earth, the map of the reachable cosmos shrinks. Because the expansion of space occurs at every point simultaneously, the cumulative effect over vast distances is staggering. At a certain point, known as the cosmic horizon, the space between us and a distant galaxy is expanding faster than the speed of light itself. This does not violate the laws of physics, as it is the fabric of space that is moving, not the objects within it. However, it creates a boundary of absolute causality. Any light or information leaving a galaxy beyond that horizon will never reach us, no matter how long we wait. Those stars have effectively fallen over the edge of the observable universe, vanishing into a dark from which there is no return. The implications of this for the future of intelligence are profound. We are currently living in a golden age of cosmology, a brief window of time where the light from billions of distant galaxies is still visible to our telescopes. But this window is slowly but surely closing. As the expansion continues to accelerate, more and more of these galaxies are being pushed across the cosmic horizon. One by one, the lights of the deep universe are going out. In the distant future, our descendants, if they still exist, will look up at a sky that is hauntingly empty. The hundreds of billions of galaxies that we can currently see will have vanished, their light stretched into such long wavelengths that they become undetectable. What will remain is only the local group, a small cluster of a few dozen galaxies, including the Milky Way and Andromeda, which are bound together by their mutual gravitational attraction. Over billions of years, these neighbours will collide and merge into a single, massive elliptical galaxy, a solitary island of stars in an otherwise infinite and empty void. To an observer in that distant era, the universe will appear to be a small, lonely place. There will be no evidence of the Big Bang, no sign of other galaxies, and no way to know that the cosmos was once a crowded and vibrant tapestry of light. The history of the universe will be erased by the very expansion that created it. This is the ultimate tragedy of the starfarer's ambition. Even if we could overcome the energy requirements, the radiation, and the biological limits of our forms, we are racing against a clock that is winding down. The territory we might once have hoped to claim is being removed from the map. The stars we see tonight are not a permanent fixture. They are a fleeting opportunity. The universe is a house with an infinite number of rooms, but the hallways are stretching so fast that we can no longer reach the doors. We are being quarantined by the physics of the vacuum, left behind in a shrinking bubble of reality while the rest of the cosmos accelerates into the dark. The silver needles on the scorched earth are not just monuments to a failed journey. They are relics of a time when the universe still seemed accessible. We are realizing that our window for departure was always small, and that we may have already missed the moment of maximum potential. The accelerating expansion of space ensures that the isolation of the human species is not a temporary condition, but a permanent state of being. We are the inhabitants of a fading light, standing on a shore that is being pulled away from the sea. The map of the infinite is being folded up and put away, leaving us to contemplate the few stars that remain, the last candles in a room that is slowly turning to black. The closing door of the universe is the final word in the story of our confinement, a silent and absolute end to the dream of a galactic future.